I'm happy to report that our second thermoform paddle is here. A few weeks back I tried the CRBN Powers, and now it's time for Vatic Pro. Thermoform paddles are all the rage right now, and with good reason. Certain playability aspects are just significantly better with thermoform paddles, and that kind of got confirmed for me playing with the Vatic Pro V7. We're still waiting on our Legacy and 6.0 orders to come in, and I'll do a full review of those paddles when they do come in, but we'll also do a full thermoform comparison once I've had time to extensively play test them all. Stay tuned for that one, and subscribe to the channel if you like our content, and remember that any of the paddles that I mention in these videos, you can also check out on our website, racketsandrunners.com. I decided to do the Vatic Pro V7 because I've already seen a lot of content about the flashes, and because the V7 is the one that's truly extended, it's a little bit more up my alley. The V7 is 16.5 inches long, it weighs between 8.3 and 8.5 ounces, and it has a 16mm core. Now the handle is a little bit shorter, a little bit more shaped like an Invicta than a Carbon 1, I guess you could say, and that just means that the paddle face is going to come a little bit lower down, but you're not going to have as much room to put two hands for a two-handed backhand. Now the flashes, on the other hand, have a very interesting shape. I haven't spent enough time on court with them to do a full review, but that slightly shorter hybrid shape is going to mean, yes, you have a little bit less leverage for power and spin potential, but you're going to gain a lot of maneuverability, so it could be very interesting, especially in a thermoform package. Back to the V7 though. Obviously I've just finished playtesting the CRBN Powers, so they're the only other thermoform paddle that I've used. I'd like to keep most of my one-to-one comparisons with that paddle for the full thermoformed overview that's coming, but I'm naturally going to make a few comparisons during this video. Here's how the V7 performed in terms of power, spin, control, and feel. I started off my review of the CRBN Powers by talking about their feel, and I'm going to do the same with the Vatic Pro V7 because it's so important to understand the feel of a thermoform paddle before you buy them. It's an extremely unique sensation that can really only be described as ultimate connection to the ball. When I switched between the V7 and non-thermoform paddles during my playtest, that just kept getting hammered into my brain. When you make contact with the ball on the V7, you feel that contact uniformly throughout the paddle. With more traditional paddles, there's a sort of disconnect between where the ball makes contact with the paddle's face and your hand. It's an extremely addictive sensation that I've already talked about a little bit in my CRBN Power review, but I think it comes from the thermoforming process, because thermoforming means there are no cutoffs in the carbon throughout the paddle, so whatever vibrations there are up here, you're pretty much feeling in your hand down here. The paddle is also remarkably stable. Again, no breaks in the carbon means that the paddle reacts as one firm object during contact. Superb stability is a theme that I'm starting to sense with thermoform paddles, and it also helps that the Vatic Pro V7 is extended and pretty heavy. Interestingly enough, I did find the V7 to have a slightly more forgiving feel than the other extended thermoform paddles that I've used. I don't play with this Invicta style shape very often, but it definitely has a noticeably bigger and more forgiving sweet spot. I do want to clarify one thing with the V7. The ultimate connection you have with the ball here does not translate to classic pickleball control. The feel might be unique and extremely positive, but the ball spends very little time in the paddle bed, which means you don't have the same amount of softness and control that you would have with more traditional 16mm paddles. I do have to say that I think the 16mm core strikes a much better balance between power and control on the Vatic Pro V7 and the CRBN Power 1, so I will say it again that I think the 16mm core is a better way going forward for thermoform paddles. Now I did find the V7 to be slightly better for control than even the 16mm CRBN Power. It's a little bit softer and has a slightly longer dwell time. That could definitely be down to the heavier weight, but I also think it's because of this longer face. Having a slightly bigger sweet spot like this makes the paddle a little bit softer because the impact on contact is dispersed over a larger surface area. Still, it is a thermoform paddle though, so it will take some time to get used to the instantaneous response, especially if it is your first time trying a thermoform paddle. So traditional control might not be the best with thermoform paddles, but you know what is the best? Power. They are quite simply more powerful than everything else out there. It's kind of the same logic for why the paddle is so stable. There's no energy lost in cutoff points throughout the carbon because it is one seamless piece, so the ball shoots out with a ton of pop. So obviously the V7 is extremely powerful, but I did find it to be ever so slightly less powerful than both of the extended CRBN Powers. Obviously, it's going to be less powerful than the 14 because that paddle is thinner, but even compared to the 16mm CRBN Power, it was noticeably less so. Those carbons have a juicy sort of zing with the way the ball shoots off the paddle bed that almost feels like an extra little bit of trampoline effect. The V7 is much more raw, and I actually did appreciate that slightly lower powered response because the paddle's already so powerful, I didn't really need more. Now I gotta say, I am very interested to try both those flash paddles because they're naturally going to be less powerful with that shorter shape. It could be an interesting varying length for thermoform paddles in the future. Thermoforming has already converted me from a thin core lover to a thick core guy, so who knows, maybe I'll like the shorter shape because I don't need the extra length for pop and spin. Now that I think about it though, it'll definitely take some getting used to that different weight distribution and swing pattern, so I probably won't like them as much, but stay tuned for that review. It's kind of hard to say what's better with thermoform paddles between power and spin, but here's what I will say. I can kind of bring my own power, but I absolutely need the spin to control that power. So if I have to pick one, I'm picking spin. It's a good thing then that spin is absolutely elite with the V7, just like with other thermoform paddles. Obviously, I've talked about how traditional control is okay at best on the V7, but because there's so much spin potential here, I never had a problem controlling it. You can control a paddle in two different ways, soft touch or high spin. I would highly recommend that with the V7, you do the latter. It's a paddle that's meant to hit hard with tons of spin. You might need to tweak the way you play a little bit with the V7, but if you can change your drop from a flat dink style shot to a high spin, low dipping one, this could be the perfect paddle for you, and it will definitely provide the proper playability to do so. I don't know if I was playing better with the V7 than I was with the CRBN Powers, but I did find it to be ever so slightly more spin friendly. I started to really master that low dipping spin drop shot with this paddle. It's a shot that I can pull off with more traditional paddles, but I just felt like I could hit it so much more consistently with this one, so be warned, once you get used to a thermoform paddle's spin potential, it's going to be tough to go back to more traditional paddles. Thermoform paddles are not for everyone. There are inherent flaws in this design that means these paddles will never be as competitive in some characteristics as other paddles, mainly soft touch and control. Now you'll be a little bit better served for control with the V7. It's at least got some sort of soft side, so you won't need surgeon-like precision to hit a touch shot, but it's still not the best for control. It's made for those of you who are going to prioritize getting your control via the spin game. If you don't plan on hitting with spin, there's really no point in getting the V7 or any other thermoform paddle for that matter. If you are willing to adapt your game though, think of all the shots that are already in your arsenal. Now picture them with just more spin added. Instead of a flat put-away volley, go for a spinned roll volley. Instead of a flat return, go for a slice backspin return. And instead of a normal flat drop shot, go for that low dipping high spin drop shot that I mentioned earlier. There will be times where you just can't get around the flat game, so you'll have to work on softening up your hands there. But for those of you who think you're advanced enough to pull that off, you're going to absolutely love this paddle. I also wanted to mention that for those of you who want a maneuverable paddle, this is not going to be the one for you because it has a longer paddle face. It's definitely not the most aerodynamic out there, and it's also heavy and elongated, so you already know the drill there. I gotta say, I am a huge fan of it, and it might just be my new paddle of choice because it's got slightly more control on that power to control ratio than other thermoform paddles, and thermoform paddles are just right up my alley. I'm excited to keep trying thermoform paddles because they are so different to everything else out there that it's going to be very interesting to compare them more as a group so I can better understand the nuance between each one. Stay tuned for the 6 zeros and legacies that should be in by the end of the month, but for now, if you want to demo any of the Vatic Pros, come visit us in store, or you can buy them online at racketsandrunners.ca.